We have a liftoff.
Hello and welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper, but most importantly today of Tennis Unfiltered, the podcast that doesn't hold back. I've got George Bellshaw with me, who, George, I think that might be some Novak Djokovic memorabilia that you've donned for the evening.
Not intentionally. It is a Lacoste jumper that my mum bought me for my birthday, I think.
She knows you so well.
Yeah, and my birthday's in July, so this is quite a big jumper, so it's got very little wear so far, but it has really turned this week. It's bloody freezing, so...
Yeah, it is actually pretty Baltic. As someone who lives in a early 20th century terraced flat, I'm not blessed with a house that really holds the heat very well, and this cold snap has really done for me. Calvin, you're in a particularly cold part of the country. How cold is it in Stockholm?
It's cold. It's it's the first time all year I've wore tracksuit, hoodie, and a coat. Not all year since the winter, since last winter, I guess.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's cold, but it's not absolutely freezing.
Okay,
it's.
And Stockholm, the stadium or the main court. It's a really weird looking place. Is it an old courtroom or something? I've never really understood.
It's an actual tennis centre, but I don't really know how to describe it. The building is huge and it's like a maze, and there's just indoor tennis courts randomly scattered around the place. And there's about 3 floors, and the tennis courts are on all 3 floors. And it's massive. It's like in the centre of Stockholm, and it's got a centre court in it that looks like an old gym floor with sort of benches. It's got a lot of history to it. You look at who's won the tournament, pretty much it's a who's who of tennis over the last 50 years. I think pretty much everyone's played here. It's nice.
And conditions-wise, I seem to remember maybe last year, the year before, quite a lot of complaints about the courts at that tournament, but how have you found them so far?
They're very slow. The courts are very slow, and the balls are very slow, standard. I don't know why the ATP insist on doing this on main tour. Slow balls, slow courts, and, what are you going to do? And then the tennis isn't that thrilling because of that. They're using the Robin Soderling balls that they tend to use in Scandinavia, which I don't have a problem with the balls as such. I just don't see why you would use slow balls, slow courts. And those are slow courts, slow balls.
I know we've spoken about court speed a lot, but more in the kind of through the lens of singles players. How big a difference does it actually make to the doubles guys, where the points are generally a lot shorter and a lot more kind of volleying and stuff? You almost expect the ball to be put away much more, presumably less impact than the singles, or is that?
I don't think that's necessarily the case, George, because 55% of the top 100 now serve and stay back. So whereas historically, and that's going up apparently by about 3 or 4% per year at the minute. So it's not necessarily like that. Now, for balance's sake, you don't want in a doubles tournament, you don't want fast balls, fast courts, because if you have fast balls, fast courts indoor doubles, then there's no rallies at all. But yeah, you get, it does play a factor in it, because you notice there's a big discrepancy in the types of players that win on slow courts and who win on quicker courts. So it definitely plays a part. We were saying today, actually, I was talking with a few of the players, and we were talking about how this problem that the ATP has with just everywhere as slow courts, especially the hard courts, indoor hard and outdoor hard, compared to the challengers, where they were saying there's some challenger tournaments where the courts are absolutely rapid. And the reason is, and I said this to them, that the only reason can be is because the main tour, they resurface their courts every year. And once you resurface it, you're getting fresh grit, because unless people don't know, when you lay a hard court, it has grit in it, it has sand in it. And the more you play in it, it basically sands down. So if you rub your hand across a fresh hard court, it's like a piece of sandpaper. You can feel the grit, and that slows the ball down as it's going, obviously, because it's going into grit, and it also roughs the ball up, making the ball slower over time. So a few games in, you've got a fully roughed up ball and on a slow surface. Whereas the Challenger tournaments, they don't have the money to resurface the court. They're just normal tennis centres. So they don't have the money to resurface every single year. So you're getting a court, they're the courts that you're getting are sometimes 8-9 years old. The one that Henry and Francisco played in last week in Malaga, you couldn't even see on the stream. I will post. I'll send you, James, a point to post on it later, because the sun was shining and the court was so worn down, it was basically shiny, and you just couldn't see the ball. So I've got a video of a rally, and you've no idea where the ball is. It's just you just see people, four guys just swinging their rackets, and you hear the sound of a ball. And for the whole time, you can't see the ball. And they said it was like that on the court from one side, because when the sun was directly above the court from one end, you couldn't see the ball at all.
Wow. So how does this compare, like, you go to a standard club court, which I don't know how often most clubs relay their courts, but not very often, right? So they'll presumably be much hardier. Will they generally be what you would consider slow anyway?
No, you can put however much, this is another thing, you can put however much grit or sand you want in the mix, and that will make it as slow as possible. Now, a newer court is always going to be slower because it has none of it as worn down. But you can put so you can choose how slow to make it. But I would say at home, if you've got an acrylic hard court, you're probably getting them, a club on average is probably getting them resurfaced about every 6 or 7 years. Right. And some of the clubs will get them done more often than that. Now, from my point of view, it is ludicrous that you'd never need to get a court resurfaced every year. It's just beyond silly. Like the NTC, I don't know how much money the LTA waste every year by having all of their hard courts resurfaced. Like what? There's no difference between in the first couple of years, you won't notice any tangible difference. Right. Or it's absolutely not getting to the stage where it's too fast after 1 year or 2 years even. And so that there's no reason to do it. Now, I guess some of the bigger tournaments you could say why, because they mark, the courts do mark, and so, for television purposes, they want a cleaner looking court. But they don't mark to a degree that you can't see anything. And after a week's tennis anyway, you've got marks on them.
I don't know whether this is a suitable segue, but thinking about courts and shoes, Calvin, I know you're a big trainer guy. And I want to start with which is probably about the 7th biggest title of the week, but Leylah Fernandez winning the title in Hong Kong. Her 3rd career title, her first outside of Mexico, which I just think is a funny stat, because I think she's had 4 WTA finals in her career and 3 of them have been in Mexico. But she won it, I don't know if you'll notice this, wearing Puma Stewie 2s, which I'm told are a basketball shoe. They're the signature shoe of WNBA MVP Breanna Stewart. Just reading some comments on Reddit and stuff, Calvin, it seems that some people do actually play tennis in basketball shoes because of the extra ankle support. I don't know whether you've ever come across it.
It's not just the extra ankle support, the grip is the same as well. So when this has gone back for some time, since the first Jordans came out. So before the first Air Jordan came out, then basically basketball players played in Converse and things like that. But since there was actually technology that went into basketball shoes, they then started putting proper grip on them, and the grip is very, very similar to that of tennis shoes. So that's always been a case. And I wore basketball shoes when I was playing for a while, because I liked the higher top shoe, like you say. But I don't know if it's because of the ankle support though, James, because there used to be ankle support tennis shoes. So the Agassi ones that regular listeners know that I love, the AirTech Challenge series that Agassi used to have. They were a high top tennis shoe. But then they kind of got phased out because players didn't like playing with them that high. It gives you a little bit more support, but it's not like wearing an actual ankle brace. So I think it's more, when I used to wear them, it's basically because tennis shoes became really expensive. And at the time, basketball shoes weren't that expensive. So you could get deals on them. There'd often be just more of them in sales and that kind of stuff. But I mean, I always, I wouldn't take a basketball shoe above a tennis shoe. But it's not unfeasible. You can play in basketball shoes for sure. Yeah, I'd say they're probably a little bit too heavy now. Because tennis shoes now, the tennis shoes that are around now are very, very light. So back then, like I'm using for example there, like the AirTech Challenge 3, which was the famous Agassi one, was made of all leather, and the Air Jordan 1, which was probably around about the same time, was also made of all leather. So there's probably no difference in actual weight. Whereas the tennis shoes now, like the Vapors and that kind of thing, the Cage, the high-end Nike ones are way lighter than, for example, the most modern pair of Jordans. So I wouldn't necessarily advise it to be playing in a top-level tennis player to be playing. But yeah, it's basically because the grip is the same.
Interesting. I mean, Georgia, you've broken or damaged most of your joints, so I assume you wear more strapping than trainers really need to apply.
No, I to be honest, I was quite glad you didn't ask me anything about this, James. I had no idea what Calvin just said all about that. So I found this a very educational segment of the podcast. I can relate that. I mean, I used to play in some quite heavy Prince trainers, and I definitely wore them far long before they should have been changed. And I remember I've got a couple of pairs of got one Nike, one Adidas pair now, and as Calvin says, I couldn't believe it when I kind of was changing, probably 10 years after I should have done. So yeah, I can definitely relate to them lining up. I can't say I own many pairs of basketball shoes, so I have to take his word for that.
It's one of the. I thought you would have been scouted for basketball, George, given your build.
I used to play a bit at school, but I was never good enough to buy specialist shoes for it. I just used some trainers.
I did a thread on Twitter. I'll try and find it. Well, you can find it if you search my timeline about the 10 best pair of 1990s tennis trainers. And in it, there's quite a sort of there was quite a crossroads moment actually with where it went from being heavy trainers to light trainers. So when Jim Courier and Pete Sampras were both world number 1 and 2 at the same time, and they both signed for Nike in the same summer, and so they both developed their own shoes. Now the Courier one, I forget the name of it, but it had Kevlar on it, which is what they make bulletproof vests from. And that was a shoe that you would get if you wanted them to last, because they came with a 6-month guarantee, because it had bulletproof material on it. Whereas the Sampras shoe, which was the Air Oscillate, was much lighter and streamlined, and that was a great tennis shoe. It was the Air Oscillate for actual playing tennis in. That was where it changed to like these things are like just weren't like wearing a pair of socks, and it was still like compared to now it'd still weigh a ton, but the Courier ones weighed an absolute ton because they had like about 70 grams of Kevlar on each shoe.
Trainer nerds all around the world are really enjoying this. I don't know how much anyone else is understanding, but it's enjoyable hearing you talk about something you enjoy, Calvin. We can just enjoy that. George, I'm going to have to ask you a follow-up question about actual tennis, because much as I was joking about Leylah Fernandez only winning titles in Mexico, it is quite interesting, and I don't like to make the comparisons with Raducanu because obviously they had that joint moment of history, but she is a player who's got quite a lot about her in terms of sort of skill set, and okay, she didn't beat many great players in Hong Kong, but winning titles makes a difference to players, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to say exactly what's going on with a player, but you do have to wonder kind of what the knock-on effect of losing that match in New York was for her. I mean, she's not had the same kind of excuses. I'm not saying Raducanu is making excuses, but she's had a lot of kind of fitness issues during that time. I don't feel Fernandez has had quite as dramatic injury problems. And she's just not really kicked on. And in many ways, kind of Fernandez's run to that US Open final was infinitely more impressive than Raducanu's. And it almost felt like, and I don't know if we remarked this at the time, that she felt a lot better placed to actually make quite a big transition towards the top of the game, because she was showing she was mixing it with the best players in the world, whereas Raducanu was relatively untested. That's not really proven to be the case, and she's struggled for not only tournament wins but actual match wins. There's been a lot of kind of really inconsistent play from her. A lot of times she's going out first round, getting a couple of rounds in maximum. So deep runs have been kind of few and far between, really. So yeah, I think it's definitely good for her. She's someone who people do know. We remember the billing of that final at the time being, is this a new big final we're going to see a lot of in women's tennis? Fernandez v Raducanu, two teenagers, young women, kind of competing, and it's not gone that way at the minute, but people will still remember that via Raducanu. So be good for her to get back into it, and hopefully it's a kicking step. As you said, James, not the strongest field, so I'm reluctant to say this is a great change of the tide, but for someone who's not had many wins, it can only be a good thing, hopefully.
Yeah, and I also just think winning titles, I think it does sort of make a bit of a difference, just winning titles generally. And also, like I said, doing it outside of Mexico, like doing it in, all right, not totally different conditions, because Hong Kong's a pretty humid place and hot place, and she obviously benefits from being incredibly good athlete and very physical, and kind of relishing that. And obviously she was wearing basketball shoes, which is the real difference. So just an interesting little result, really. I've got another equipment-based question for you. We will go on and mention, we should mention that Jessica Pegula won the title in Korea, and revealed an interesting little tidbit on her Twitter, saying that this one is extra special. I'm half Korean. I don't speak the language, and I'm still learning about my culture. My mum was adopted and left on a doorstep of a Korean police station. But I've been overwhelmed by the support from Korean fans. My mum visited her orphanage here when I played this event 4 years ago. It was the first time she felt open about learning about her past, her health struggles the past year, made this tournament a goal to win. It's been such an honour to play in front of you. Jessica Pegula often criticised for being the sort of boring one in the top 10, so I hope that people start to maybe drop that particular moniker over time. But the kind of news line that came out of the Korea Open, I'm not sure we've ever talked about Eva Lys before on the show, but she pulled out the Korea Open due to injury, and basically said she was having problems with all the ball changes. She said, I think it's time for the WTA to rethink ball change throughout the tournaments. Adjusting every week has been really tough on a lot of players. Now, I hear this from players a lot about, it's a different ball, every week, or, ball changing. And obviously, like to Grand Slams, you play with the same ball as the slam leading up to it. Calvin, can you explain in layman's terms why changing ball from tournament to tournament has such an impact? Is it as simple as, if it's a different ball, you've got to spend a bit more time hitting it to get used to it, and therefore you're just upping your load? Or is there more to it even than that?
I think that varies from player to player. Some players will say that they just don't like the change of it. They don't care which ball it is, but they don't like changing of the ball too much. It's the felt and that kind of stuff. It's mainly the felt, what kind of felt it is. It just feels different off the racket. And some players will just say that certain balls are just crap and they don't want to play with those balls. Now, I don't really know where I stand on it, because it's like anything in the modern world. There's an element of capitalism about it, in that the reason why the tournaments have different balls is because it depends which ball supplier they can agree the best deal with. And there's quite a lot of money in that. For example, Wilson named their best ball after the US Open.
Yeah.
It's the Wilson US Open. So, so then it's not like who would be in charge of this. And they will have to pay
a lot of money for the rights to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Wilson will have to pay the US Open for it, yeah. Exactly. And similarly, Wimbledon is a Slazenger ball. It's Slazenger, it always has been Slazenger. I don't know what you could do. So, like, say that the ATP decided, right, we're having the ball of the ball of the ATP is going to be the Babolat team. Okay, then what's US Open going to go? No, wait up. We've got a good deal with these. We've got a good deal with Wilson. Like, where you're not telling us what kind of ball we have to use, because then you're taking away our negotiating position from that. So but at the same time, what I can't understand is why you can't just have I can understand it, sorry. What you could say, one argument is just tell all the ball companies we have to have a standardised felt, a standardised bounce, and that kind of thing. That's what it's got to be. But then they'd lose their negotiating position. They could say then that, well, wait a minute, we think our ball is better than that. Well, why would we? All the balls think they've got the superior product. This week now we're playing with the Robin Soderling ball, as they tend to play within Scandinavia, which claimed that it was the perfect tennis ball. It's rounder than any other tennis ball, apparently, and has the best felt. And he's gone pretty big. He was sat next to me today, actually. So, and that's a startup company. He's obviously got a startup company. It's been going a few years now. So what are you going to do with him? You're going to tell him, no, you're out of business now because all the tournaments have to use the same ball.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to what I was talking about with someone yesterday, because Novak Djokovic has been talking this week about the PTPA and various things. We might come onto it. But it comes back to that same thing where there are so many different stakeholders in every tournament that you couldn't negotiate a unilateral deal and just say, this, as you say, Calvin, this is the ball of men's tennis. You couldn't do it because all the tournaments are owned by so many different kind of strands. It would be.
I don't even know the legalities. I don't even know if the legalities of it that you could say is there a monopolies infringement there, where the other companies would say, what for example would Wilson, Robin Soderling, Yonex, Babolat all say if the ATP went, right, we're using Dunlop now. That's what we're using.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you would have to go. I don't know US law on monopolies remotely.
Yeah,
but
I'm
obviously,
sure there'd be somewhere that would say no, that's not how it's going to work. It won't change. It won't change just because of that. The company, the tournaments need to be able to negotiate their own ball, and the companies will say, well, we think our ball's the best ball. I know that there are certain balls. The players, the professional players, can tell the difference. Like I think it's like I can't tell the difference now. If I was maybe hitting more balls, I may be able to. But it's the same with the players can tell. Look, these are guys who can tell the difference if their racket's half a pound looser than and if they're playing with a different ball. The players can immediately tell the difference.
Is the injury aspect real? Or is that something that's been said on the tour and it's just kind of carried away? Do you think there's any actual science?
I think all I would say about that, George, is I know that from physios and purely for things such as tendinitis, which is quite a big injury, is that they say that all the physios will say changing anything is likely to increase the likelihood of tendinitis. So changing the amount you play, doing more, changing the racket you use, changing the string you use, changing the string tension you use. So therefore, changing the ball you play is likely to increase the likelihood of tendinitis, just because your body gets used to something and adapts to that thing, and then it's adapted to it. And once you start changing things all the time. Now, I don't know enough about. We'd have to speak to a physio to ask about actual, whether changing the ball every week can actually directly affect an injury. I've got to say I'm a little bit skeptical about it, just because of other than tendinitis, which I can see there's an element of that, because I know I've had players who suffer from tendinitis just through changing string tension by 1 or 2 pounds, and that kind of thing. So, but other than tendinitis, I can't see look, you're not pulling a hamstring because you're playing with a different ball. You know what I mean? And it's like you're not even in the, I can't see how the torque that you're putting through a shoulder on a serve compared to the minuscule change of a ball is, I'd find it difficult to see how that affects that injury and that kind of thing. I think it's more for players. It's more the frustration of having a different ball all the time.
Let's move on. Let us know if you're an amateur who thinks they're good enough to tell the difference between a ball just by hitting it. I'd be fascinated to hear it. Give us an email, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. George, you reckon you might?
I can tell the difference between new balls and really old ones, if that helps.
I mean, what I will say, this was the first year, the pre-US Open this time, when we practiced before. They ended up, I think this year, they ended up using the same ball for men's and women's. But,
yes.
But at the NTC, where we practiced for a little bit before that, they had both the old balls and the women's balls and the men's balls, the extra duty and the normal duty. And that was tangible just in how quickly they fluffed up. The normal duty balls were fully fluffed up within about 7 or 8 minutes of tennis, whereas the heavy duty ones, you would get 25 minutes out of them, which is about how long you'd expect for a ball change.
I still remember that story you, Calvin, of saying when Luke was playing futures somewhere like Germany, and like they change every 11 games in futures or something, or 13?
11 and 13,
and it was just going like 7-6, 6-7, and points lasting like 10 minutes.
Well, this is the one thing I've never got. I've said it on the pod before. I never get why we do it in tennis, why they change it but for a certain amount of games rather than an actual time.
Yeah.
Like, surely it would make more sense. Especially in doubles, it makes no difference because you have sudden death juice. So, you know, it's like you're not getting long games in that. You're not really getting long rallies either. But I don't get why you wouldn't go, right, we change balls every half hour or the game after the half hour has gone. I think that would be.
I suppose it's to try and make it fair with the serving, isn't it? But I don't really see.
It wouldn't make any difference though, because you're still getting the ball still worn by the same amount, if you know what I mean. So you're not going to sacrifice winning a point. You're not going to guy going, I could win this point now, but I'd rather not. I'd rather drag it on for another 10 seconds. So he's got a fluffier ball to serve with in the next game. That's not going to happen, is it? But
I don't know how exploitable it'll be.
It's just one of those things that I figure at some stage in tennis, somebody's going to figure, actually, this is a stupid idea. Let's just change after a certain amount of time. But I remember that tournament in Germany on the slowest clay courts I've ever been in, because they were about 100 meters below sea level. So everything was damp in a forest. And you could try and... I don't think you could even get ball abuse in that place. The balls were so heavy. If you tried to whack it out of the court, it'd probably land like just 10 centimeters past the baseline or something.
Oh, dear. Right, just to tidy up our last bit of WTA, Cheng Xinwen winning the title in Chengdu. I'm sorry for my Chinese pronunciation. I am working on it, I assure you. But she went and won the title anyway, which is, I don't know, George. We kind of talked about how important, and you wrote to a certain extent about how important it would be to have like Chinese talent winning Chinese tournaments. She's obviously someone who we all think is pretty talented. So pretty good to see her go and win that title, really. I mean, a good moment to end at least the WTA Chinese Swing on.
Yeah, it was a good result, really, for the women's tour there, and hopefully we'll generate a few more bums on seats next year, maybe, pulling them all back. What maybe won't bring them back is the threat of having to hear her sing again. Which I have to say, of all the stunts I've seen in tennis, this really was not a good one.
So what did she sing?
Lord only knows. It was something in Mandarin, I assume.
Right. Okay.
It didn't sound particularly in tune to me. But I can't say I know the song. Maybe they enjoyed it more there. I was kind of thinking, who, after seeing that, like, who is the one player you'd want on the tour to win a title where they had to like mandatorily sing a song at the end of it?
Yeah, that's a question for Calvin. I can't think off the top of my head if any of them can sing.
I mean, definitely not Denis Shapovalov. 100%. I don't know.
There must be some good singers, but none spring to mind. Let us know on Twitter at Unfiltered Tennis.
Well, Andrey Rublev was in a boy band, wasn't he?
Yeah,
that's true. He was in a One Direction tribute band. Yeah.
I was thinking, right, has just going off topic here, has there been a bigger turnaround, can anyone remember, in the sort of perception of a player than Andrey Rublev in the last 2 years? Because sort of 2 years ago, he seemed to be this like dour, dim, overly intense, like, serious sort of standardized cliche of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And now he's like just the most fun guy ever. Everyone loves him. But then, it's quite a turnaround, I think.
He might be the only bloke who had a good Labour Cup. Like, he was just hilarious at all points.
Well, I think because I think he both tried and saw it for the ridiculousness that it actually is. I find it a bit strange, and it's not an act because I've seen him around the tour. This is also around the tournaments as well. He's just at the US Open when he was there, and he's just having a laugh with everybody. And 2 years ago at Wimbledon, stern-faced and exactly how you'd imagine him. This is very, good to see, but
I don't think it's an accident. He has talked a lot about working on, being nicer to himself on the court, and I think when you go out to make that kind of personal growth in terms of treating yourself better on the court, I think you do inevitably change who you are a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know about that. You see what he did when he lost yesterday. Thinking nearly, I don't know if it's possible, but he almost broke a thigh. I think with his racket.
Well, we all revert to type occasionally, but
is that better than punching it with your knuckles? I think the knuckles thing always looks so bloody painful to me.
Yeah.
Today, when I was watching Henry and Jules, and I was watching it with Evo, actually, he was sat next to me, and Nadovyasov, not Henry and Jules, Henry and Francisco Cabral, his new partner. Nadovyasov whacked his calf with some serious aggression, and we both looked at each other and said he was about a centimetre away from his shin. And if it had hit his shin, I reckon the racket would have gone straight through it. I know the guys in Kazakhstan are pretty tough, but he was not far away from his shin bone at all when he whacked it.
Oh dear me. Sorry, I'm being distracted because the dog has come to ask me for things, and I don't know what you want. So
he wants to know who the best singer is, or he's got something to chip in.
I mean, I think Buzz puts himself in there, but he's not very good at tennis. He doesn't like tennis balls, unfortunately. I can't distract him with them. It might be Andrey Rublev, who I interviewed him at Boodles this year, and he was genuinely really funny. He was doing some press thing before us where they were like, "What's your favourite British food?" I think I've told the story before, but obviously that's an awful question because British food doesn't exist and is mostly a bit rubbish. So someone was like, "Oh, what about Yorkshire pudding?" Oh no, I don't know what that is. What about a scone? I don't know what that is. What do you mean you don't know what a scone is? Someone had to go get him a scone in order to explain what it was.
They did have scones. I mean, I know that when I think I said this on the pod at the time, when Luke and Jules played against the Tsitsipas brothers there, and they had some they had some sort of afternoon tea type thing in the players' area. And one of the funniest things I've seen all year was somebody trying to explain to Stefanos Tsitsipas what a sausage roll is. And he was holding it like it was the most bizarre thing he'd ever seen. And he's
I can just
not the
see
easiest
him
to explain anything at all.
I can just see him being like, "What is this sausage roll? What is it? What? Right? Okay, yeah."
Yeah, it was. It was quite sad, and I assume it was the same. They did have scones there, so I think they probably had to. I did see. I don't know whether anyone saw it. That thing last week with Jerry Shang and Andy Murray, where they were comparing Scottish food and Chinese food.
I did not.
It's on. You see, it's on Tennis TV Instagram. But I found it quite angering. I was saying this to Henry earlier. I found it quite angering that one of the things that they had Andy Murray give Jerry Shang as from Scotland was Iron Brew. And Andy was, I love Iron Brew. It's an amazing drink. And that really winds me up because that's bullshit because they've taken all the sugar out of it. And I don't see how anybody could really like Iron Brew anymore. So
they changed the recipe. It's pretty controversial stuff now. That dominated political debate in Scotland for 2 weeks. That's all anyone talked about. I never liked it anyway. I grew up in Scotland, and a lot of my mates swear by it for a hangover, but I just can't go on with it.
Do you want to hear a near Iron Brew related fact? Or at least it was a fact at one point.
Go on.
I don't know. Yeah, you're going to tell us anyway.
The reason I bring it up is because Iron Brew is often answered in this question, but it's not the answer I'm looking for.
Right.
What is the only fizzy drink in the world that outsells Coca-Cola in a country?
It's a nice question. Is it in Mexico?
It's not in Mexico. It's not.
Okay. No, I don't know. You have to. You can pause it at home and have a think about it. and now you've unpaused it because you can't think of it, and George, you can tell us the answer.
Well, at least when I first read this fact, which was possibly about 10 years out of date.
You've just internalised complete nonsense now.
It was Inca Kola in Peru.
Peru? Right, okay. I wouldn't mind some Inca Kola.
Yeah. I don't think it's that dissimilar to Iron Brew, to be honest. So maybe that's the kind of funky taste.
Peru might well be one of those countries where we're the number one tennis podcast, because we are. Actually, incidentally, we overtook the tennis podcast in Australia again this week. So thanks to all our Australian listeners for getting us back to number one down under. If you could speed up my visa application that I've just sent off, that would be ideal. That'd be a good deal to swap for. But if you're listening in Peru, let us know about Inca Kola. Maybe send us some. That'd be great. I'd love to give it a go.
I've had it before. It's nice.
Okay. I love Coke from South America. Cola, sorry. Anyway, before I get myself in some Rishi Sunak.
I tried this year. I tried that Mexican Coke this year, and I'm very much a Coke aficionado. The drink, of course, not. Let's make that clear. And I've heard everyone rave about Mexican Coke for years, and I prided myself that I could always tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi and et cetera, et cetera. And I couldn't tell any difference between Mexican Coke and normal Coke.
Is it like Irish Guinness, where you need to drink it in Ireland when it's not travelled so far?
I don't think so, because I had it in Dallas, which is like, it's just over the border.
Not far, yeah.
But England's not far from Ireland, and it still does taste different.
It's a different ingredient. No, the thing with Mexican Coke is a different ingredient. It's cane sugar.
Right.
And normal Coke uses fructose syrup, as Rishi Sunak said in his famous...
Also, the Guinness thing is, and I'm gonna annoy some Irish listeners here. I'm gonna preface it with saying I like Guinness, right? I like